Hey everyone, Ben Coomber Radio, episode number 155. Now, it's not often we talk about movement, flexibility, looking after your body from more of the kind of the physical realm, the nuts and bolts, the skeleton, the muscle, that kind of stuff. And it's about time we delved back into that topic again. Our last guest was Movement Without Pain. Fantastic guest, absolutely brilliant work. But there's a specific therapy that I've used before. I'm a big fan. My masseuse uses it on me regularly, along with loads of other crazy stuff. Same with my osteopath as well. So I thought it was about time we talked about ART. I got chatting to a lovely fellow on Twitter, and he said, well, get me on the podcast and we'll talk about ART. So I said, well, let's get you on the podcast. Let's talk about ART. Tom Feeney, hello.
Hello, Ben. Thank you for having me on.
You are welcome. Now, I know that we're recording this in UK time. We set up a UK date, and you don't sound like you're from the UK.
I am not originally, and why is it that we Americans move here and we still sound the same? We never change our accents. But when you guys move to the US, you all change. What's that all about?
Yeah, weird.
But no, I've been here about 13 years, so I'm loving every minute of it. So yeah, I'm a Geordie now.
Yeah, sound it.
Aye, man.
Yeah, I'd keep practice on that. I think we pick up other people's accents well because we're just vanilla. Our accent is very plain, very boring. I like to think I sound very generically British.
There is something to that. When I go to Ireland, then I kind of pick that up. But being here in Geordie land, I don't sound a word different. I don't know why.
So there's going to be loads of people that have no idea who you are. Give us a bit of background. What brought you into the kind of therapy realm? Why do you specialise in what you do? Give us a backstory.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think it goes back to being in high school. I was watching the Super Bowl, and I was trying to look up today which Super Bowl it was. Not really sure. I think it was either 1985 or 1989. It was back when the 49ers were the big thing, and Joe Montana was the quarterback. And there was a segment, pregame show, where they showed the chiropractor treating the players. And by that time, I was a sports mad kid playing every sport you can imagine. And I was on the bench watching my basketball team, realized I wasn't going to make it as a pro. And I saw the show. I saw this chiropractor treating Jerry Rice and Joe Montana. And I think like 35 players were all getting treated, and they showed it in the pregame show. And I thought at that moment, that's what I was going to do. So I got into, went ahead and wanted to become a chiropractor. I didn't even know what it was. And then when I was in chiropractic school, there was huge press because the 1996 Olympics, Donovan Bailey won a gold medal. And the two guys that were working with him was the guy who created ART, Mike Leahy, and his close associate, this guy, Mark Lindsay. Anyway, it was the cover of the newspaper in Toronto. This big story because Donovan Bailey won the gold medal and set the world record at the same time, and he pulled his groin like 3 weeks before the race. So it was a big news up there, and I was in the States going to chiropractic school, so it made a big deal at my school. We all started talking about ART. I was the only one who put up the money and drove out to Colorado Springs right away to learn it out of my friends, and I've just been hooked ever since. And within a year and a half, I was actually treating Donovan Bailey myself.
No way.
So, yeah.
So did you actually end up being the guy in the dressing room treating the 35 NFL players?
Sort of. Right away, I went to work for the guy who was treating a who's who of famous athletes in Montreal. And he just did ART. He was a personal trainer who switched to therapy. And he was just a really gifted guy looking back. And I went to work with him, and we were doing the CFL football team. I did some of the NHL, Montreal Canadian then, and we were doing almost every top athletics event performer. And I toured a lot with this guy named Bruni Cern, who was like the second fastest guy in the world for a while. And so I did that for quite a while, and then ended up doing NFL and doing some Premier League for Sunderland for 2 years. They used to come to my office. So yeah, basically the dream came true.
Nice. Unfortunately, you couldn't help Sunderland win, though.
I actually work right next to Newcastle, so I kind of prefer to see Newcastle win. But hey, I'm a whore. I'll go wherever the money. I'll take that back.
Sure. So, okay, we've already intimated that there's this concept called ART.
Yeah.
What is it? Why is it of benefit to people? What's different?
Well, it's I think anticipating this question, I kind of thought about it. I think ultimately it's the tension you put on the muscle. It's a specific way of holding a muscle. You shorten the muscle. The patient shortens the muscle, and then as the patient actively lengthens the muscle, or you passively, the provider stretches the muscle. You hold a tension on the muscle, and as the muscle comes underneath that tension, you get a certain feeling. I'm sure you've had it many times, and that somehow that triggers something in the brain that creates range of motion change, pain change right away. Not 100% sure what it is doing, but the research is very positive in that the results are good, and of course word of mouth has spread. So for whatever reason, it has this neurological effect. We call it a neurophysiological effect. There's some thought that maybe you're breaking up scar tissue, and that is possible in some cases, but most current thinking, speaking as myself, not representing ART, I would say it's unlikely to be scar tissue, but more likely to be a neurophysiological response.
Yeah, because to me, you're kind of almost reprogramming the length-tension relationship to a degree in the muscle. Because I've had it done, and it's almost like you put an iron on the muscle, like you say, when it's shortened, and then I look to lengthen it, and you kind of pull the muscle through that pressure that you've created. And I've had it on a different body parts, and it is a very strange feeling, but the result you get is quite instantaneous. Not that there's any kind of cure aspect to it, but in terms of how it changes, how that muscle is operating right there and then, it's fast. It happens quick.
Yeah. There's also some specificity. I mean, the course is very hard to. You can't just show up. You need to study before you get there. Most courses aren't like that. Like this is it's intense stuff, and to know it all well. And even after 18 years of doing it and doing a little bit of ART instructing this year, it's hard for me to remember the moves I don't do regularly. There's a lot to it, and one of the bigger things also is we try to get in between muscles, not just treat the muscle, and that makes that separates it from other techniques.
Interesting. So when you've obviously trained as a chiropractor, you've probably got skills in soft tissue release, ART, and then a mixture of things. I'm assuming ART is just one of these tools in your bag, and that when you're looking at an issue, pathology, whatever you describe it as with a patient, you are looking at potentially bone manipulation, soft tissue, the neurophysiological release of ART.
Yeah, definitely. It is. It's one of the tools. Although I've kind of created a niche. We were talking about positioning ourselves before. So I end up seeing a lot of people because they know I do ART coming to me for specific like repetitive strain injuries. But when treating an athlete, yes, you have to put the whole package together. You don't just rub where it hurts. So yeah, I've been big into myofascial release even before I was into ART, and ART is a form of myofascial release. There's a slight difference, but I still do a lot of traditional chiropractic spinal manipulation, and put it all together. And movement assessment, and movement exercise, using exercise for treatment. And most ART people now kind of combine all those things together.
That's good, because I have quite often in the past given physios a bit of stick, purely because I've seen a lot of physios and they're teaching right out of the textbooks, and nothing's really changed with the textbooks in quite a while in physiotherapy. And I'm a massive fan that you have to look at the skeleton, the biomechanics, the joint and the movement. You have to look at the muscles that innervate it. Then you have to look at potential scar tissues, old injuries, where there is length tension irregularities. And only then can you really be a true practitioner of the physical body and its manipulation and change of that. Because as soon as you look at just the bone, you don't address the muscle. As soon as you look at the muscle, you don't address the bone. So to hear that you complement yourself, and I try and push people as much as possible to find a practitioner like you, I've got an osteopath who's like you. He is amazing. There's nothing that he doesn't know about the body in terms of the bones and the muscles, and it took me a while to find him. How would you advise finding someone of your kind of ability? Obviously, there's going to be people listening to this that live near Newcastle, and they're probably going to go, do you know what, I'm going to go and see that Tom fella. He sounds like a very good person. But there's going to be people all around the UK that I like to try and point people to. How do you try and find a practitioner of this quality?
Well, you had Perry Nicholson on a while back.
Yeah, Stop Chasing Pain.
Yeah, which gave me the idea to contact you, actually, him and this guy Rich Knight in Cambridge. Actually, when you had Perry on, there's a CrossFit near me in Blythe, CrossFit guy, it's called Elaine Norris. And anyway, she came in to see me because she said, hey, I heard about you talking about ART. So you asked him the same question, how do you find a practitioner? Well, we have a website, an Active Release, activerelease.com. You go on there and click the Europe tab. There's a Find a Provider form in there, and you can find all around Europe. We've got people in almost every European country, and there's about 50 or 60, I think, maybe even more, who've done it in the UK. So there's quite a few in the UK now, and Ireland.
Okay, that's good to know.
ART, one quick thing on that. ART also is linked in with Gray Cook's SFMA, which is an assessment system where you do a movement assessment and then you determine whether it's a motor control issue versus a restricted issue with mobility. So that is why most ART people will kind of combine the two.
Nice. Okay, talking about mobility, with people that have mobility issues, where does your opinion sit on what is quite often the root cause? Because I'll take, for example, the people that I train with, both in the gym and rugby. Most of them would complain that they've got tight hamstrings, tight anterior deltoids, tight rectus, tight hip flexors, stuff like that. How much of that do you see as a flexibility tightness issue or a movement biomechanics something else issue?
In the athletic population, I would say quite often it is a motor control issue, something that you need to address. In the bodybuilder, I treat a lot of bodybuilders and powerlifters. In that case, I think they often train themselves into where they are. The mobility issue is a restricted tissue. So there's a mix. And the office workers, they're all a little bit different. But I had a guy in today, actually, who is a very he's a competitive powerlifter. It was the first time I'd ever seen him. And he had restricted ankle movement, which we call dorsiflexion. So he couldn't basically have his knees go in front of his toes, but only on one side. So if you find that asymmetry where you have one side of a restricted joint, and it wasn't the joint actually that was causing it, it was the muscle. It was what's called a soleus muscle. That was probably, that's the key to unlocking all his other issues. He didn't come in complaining of that. Of course, it's not even hurting. So you've got to try to find that, what's the ultimate source that
the
pyramid is.
Okay, because quite often, surely, length tension or tension comes about with the body because we have incorrect movement patterns. The tension then develops as a result of the incorrect movement pattern. We then focus on the tension because that's the source of the pain or the adhesion and the where your kind of brain is connecting the issue to. And then really we need to go in and fix the problem, which is quite often what we'll go to a physio for or a sports masseuse or whatever. But then most of us will never really look back at the movement pattern that created that original problem in the first place.
Yeah, and Perry Nicholson talked about that, and he's one of the leaders in it. And this idea of finding where, sometimes we call it primal movement pattern. I'll have powerlifters who can't roll over when you don't let them use their legs. So you have them lie on their back, and it's part of the SFMA check system. And it's amazing. The guy who's in today couldn't do a split squat very well. He had a real trouble with his lateral stability and also a few different of the tests. And so it's very interesting. And it's good that he has these problems because they're all pretty easy to address. Mm-hmm. But when you have a shoulder, let's say you have a rotator cuff that in the shoulder girdle, it becomes imbalanced where somebody is restricted into internal rotation. that's where quite often it does come down to, great, yeah, exercise is amazing, and I am all for this movement to push exercise as a therapy. But without the soft tissue ART type thing, the results are much slower. And athletes want, of course, everybody wants, but especially athletes want, they want immediate, quick results. And if you can change somebody's shoulder range of motion that's causing this pain or lack of performance up and down the chain, instant results is what matters.
I agree. That's why I think I'm such a proponent of going and finding someone that can get stuck in manually, because I'll give one example. I've been to see my osteopath nearly every week for the last 4 months to iron out various things, and we're trying to look at my lower limb biomechanics as well as a right arm movement issue. And he's found about 4 old minor hamstring tears that he's had to try and go in, move about the tissues, because that's inhibiting my movement properly in my lower limbs, and that's affecting how my ankle is tracking, and I keep getting a bit of a tight Achilles on one side. And I'll say to people, look, you can stretch, you can foam roll, and it's going to have a short-term effect, especially pre-training. It's going to give you some mobility, but there's no better way than finding someone that can get in there with the tools and manually start to move that about. And I personally find that's the only real way to long-term success with these things.
Well, of course, I agree. But I say to people, like, a good ART session is like 6 weeks of stretching. I'm all for foam rolling. I'm pretty heavily into the research. I'm research-based treatment for the most part whenever I can. I'm not a slave to the research, but I do like, and there's a lot of positive research about foam rolling. But just using those tools themselves isn't quite good enough for quite a few people who, elite performers definitely, in whether it be golf, whether it be triathlete, whether it be CrossFit. Having good biomechanics, quite often you have niggles that turn into larger problems and eventually lead to movement pattern faults. Which came first, chicken or the egg, doesn't really matter.
What matters is you get it sorted.
Yeah, and why would so this guy Mike Leahy comes up with this idea for ART, right? And the guy is quite a clever dude, Anyway, he comes up with these ideas, and he starts working with an NFL football team. Now all 30 have one. So how do you can't buy that kind of access. You can't do that through marketing. You can't, how do you go to get every single, that's a hard nut to crack to get in. And there's every single NFL team, every single NHL team, almost every baseball team in North America. And in here, we've got Tottenham, Everton, Leicester Tigers rugby. It's growing in Europe. But I think in 5 years, it'll just be everywhere.
No, I agree, and I'm all for the promotion of the therapy. So just kind of maybe helping out the general consumer here, because not everyone's going to be in a position to go and see people, that kind of stuff. In terms of you as a practitioner, when you give generalist advice on flexibility, movement, what can people do that takes, let's say, 5, maybe 10 minutes a day to look after lower limb biomechanics, back health, core health, joint health, whatever you, I suppose, see as a problem potentially as a practitioner?
Yeah. Well, the thing that comes into my head right away is the Brett Contreras recommends people, and he's dead right now. I've followed his lead, that they do a full squat every day for 30 seconds.
Wow.
Basically, use it or lose it.
Yeah.
Once you're in that position, you've got full ankle flexion, your knee and your hip, all three. It's okay to round your back if you're not loading weight. Butt wink is fine if there's no load on your shoulders. So go into that position for 30 seconds every day. If you start that in your 30s, then hell, you've got a good chance of doing that when you're 90. Eastern cultures do it. There is a little bit of research that says it's tough on your knees. There was a link between doing it in Eastern cultures and having knee degeneration down the line. Not that degeneration always causes pain, but I think that's the best. Having good movement and then expanding on it. Just moving poorly and moving a lot poorly isn't a great idea.
I like that, and I suppose the problem is a lot of this advice is really common sense, because if you think the things that you want to be good at, you need to be practiced. So I have to double check myself. I work at home, I'm doing a lot in my office, and I might be standing, which is better than sitting a lot of the time. I'm actually not often enough practicing rotation. not giving my spine enough flexibility. I'm not maybe opening my hip flexors enough. And when you go to want to use that movement, it's not there, but we expect it to be there. I'll get into the gym and I'm like, right, I'm going to squat, and I'm like, God, my hip flexors need flipping 15 minutes of massage before they want to do what I want them to do. But again, I love that 30 seconds of squatting every day. It's a simple practice of an essential body movement.
All right, here's one myth, because myths are always pretty good to go to. The hip flexors. I would argue, and this is just me personally speaking, that it's probably over-diagnosed as a problem. Quite often, people come in thinking their hip flexor is a huge problem, and it's actually pretty rare. And your hip flexors shorten when you squat, so they're not. They won't affect your squat at all in that type of manner. And if you have tight hip flexors, we used to say that would cause a hyperlordosis, meaning that basically like a J-Lo kind of backside sticking out, high, heavy curve in your lumbar spine. It's not true, because where the psoas attaches, it's too anterior to do that, or it's too posterior to do that. So anyway, tight hip flexors from sitting too much does not necessarily cause bad posture or back problems.
I'm in a constant argument with various practitioners to why my hip flexors operate the way they do. Because for example, if I stretch my hip flexors before I squat, I will easily lose a good 20% strength in my squat. Big strength.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I hate doing it, and people always recommend, "Oh, you're tight, you need to stretch." I'm like, if I stretch, I'm gonna be squatting with the pink weights. It's not gonna look good.
Yeah, you were on Propane Fitness's podcast, and they're friends of mine. And Johnny's a competitive powerlifter, as well as Yusuf, but same kind of thing. Johnny came into me, and he's just doing so much mobility work. And I think he's a case of somebody who was overdoing it. So sometimes we can overdo it. I think it is overdone by too many people who take the message and then just run with it too far.
So, okay, how would you know if you are taking it too far?
That can be a little bit tricky, but basically, if you're spending more than, I'd say, 10 minutes, you're probably taking it too far. You don't need to be doing things in massive amounts of time. There's no link between having great flexibility and having less back pain, for example. Having tight hamstrings is, in some cases, completely normal and completely fine. I don't think you always... We try to focus more on asymmetries rather than just saying if both sides have the issue, then you probably don't need to address it. So I think if you are really focusing heavily on trying to get your hip flexors to be looser or your anterior hip, I think that's probably a waste of time. If you can't do a full squat and you do have butt wink, try to work on it. But if you're not getting any improvement and you don't get any worse when you stop, then stop wasting your time doing it. So that would be my advice.
Nice.
Don't waste your time.
Because I don't think anyone wants to do that much flexibility work. It feels like quite a mundane thing. But one thing I do love is stretching. I just love a good big stretch. I'll quite often do it on a Friday afternoon, day before a game. I'll just chill in front of the telly, do a bit of quad stretch, hamstring stretch, foam roll of most of my body, just try and get movement and blood through my body. And I feel a lot better the next day, but I don't do anything aggressively. So if I feel that something's really tight, I won't really go for it, because personally I believe that my body is biomechanically doing what it is right now to be as efficient as possible with the relationships that I have between my muscles and my bones. So I don't want to disrupt that, especially before I'm going to go and run around a pitch aggressively for 80 minutes.
Yeah, and we would kind of put that in the category of a motor control problem. That quite often someone thinks they have tight hamstrings, so they're overdoing it, stretching. Not that there's anything wrong with it. That routine you're doing, I say, is cool. And if you like doing it, great. There's no harm. There's a lot of gray area here. It isn't black and white. You're stretching too much. No, that's fine. But we say motor control, which means that, for example, if someone can't do a squat, but then you hold their hands and then they try to do a squat and they can go all the way down, well, it's not a flexibility issue then, is it? And you'd be shocked at how many people think that they're too tight to go down when really it isn't their hip sockets, which can be the problem. They can do the motion, and if they hold on to you or a pole, they can go all the way down. So it isn't hard to figure out that they don't need to stretch more.
Okay, so if you're talking about rewiring that motor control, do you think it's something that has to be guided by a practitioner so they can almost cue the right motor control?
Not necessarily. I think I'm all for trying it on your own first, and if you try and it doesn't work out, then seek somebody's help. But it isn't rocket science, and now with the internet, it's amazing. There's just so much out there where I've been in this game long enough to remember when you had to buy a textbook that was obsolete by the time you bought it. I mean, it was awful. Now if you really search things out, there's plenty of really good sources now online who can help you teach yourself how to do these things. If you're not that way inclined and you want to go see someone right away, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of time that I've, learned something off someone and just sat on YouTube for 15 minutes and tried to work my way through a couple of tutorials and stuff. And that's, the power of YouTube has been fantastic for, I think, movement-based practice because we need to see it, don't we? We need to see it, visualize, move it. And I don't think people, again, use that common sense connection of, I'll go and see who's teaching this stuff online and learn it.
Yeah. A really good example is rolling patterns. And this is this idea of something that you had fundamentally when you were one and you developed, and somewhere along the line you've lost. And that rolling patterns is a cool thing. You can check it out online. It isn't rocket science. You watch it, you learn what you should be able to do. You don't use your arms or you don't use your legs, and you roll. And if you're unable to do that, well, one of the best ways to fix it is just practice. And you probably don't need a therapist to help you to that. And that's huge. You see these people have these terrible movement patterns, and it all stems back to their inability to roll and crawl.
Hang on, right, rolling. So you mentioned this earlier with the powerlifting example. You said you've got to keep your feet still, lie on the floor on your back, and just literally just try and roll over, right?
Yeah. The best way is, once again, go to YouTube. Find these clips. Perry Nicholson is...
Screw YouTube, Tom. I'm doing it right now. I'm doing it on the podcast. You can keep talking if you want, but I'm about to lie on the floor and roll over.
Right, let me see if you can lie on your back, right? Put your feet out straight, and roll over, but don't use your legs at all. You're allowed to use your arm, the arm that you're rolling away from, and just can you roll over? Can't you roll back and forth? And there's about...
Yeah, I nailed it.
Cool.
You you just sort of shift the weight in your hips slightly.
There's a slight technique to it, but you'd be surprised how many people I've seen who can't do it, even people who are elite athletes. And when you look and you can't figure out why something's wrong, quite often you go back to the basics and they're unable to do it. Stability is another one where you're on all fours and you try to stretch out, let's say, the same hand and leg on the same side, which is a little bit difficult for some people. But that powerlifter I had in today, I hope he doesn't watch this. I told him about it, so he probably is. He couldn't do it. He couldn't do it well at all. And here's a guy who can throw up, I'd imagine, massive numbers. He's a huge guy. And one other thing, another myth is this idea that you can just if you deadlift and squat and you have good form, that'll sort out all your issues. Well, quite often that's the case, but I've seen too many people that's not the case. And so let's say sissy corrective exercises, they're against. And I tested one girl who was a CrossFit girl, and she was, I'm not doing corrective exercises, and I've seen plenty of people with that attitude. And then she couldn't roll over. And she still wasn't convinced. Oh, squatting's all I need. Well, then how come these people fail these tests who squat all day, every day, and can deadlift huge numbers? Obviously, in their foundational skills have eroded, and they need to do, let's say, even a side plank to get their hip range of motion to be normal. And that's I can't think of his name right now. The guy in Canada who's big into that. I'll think of it in a minute. Anyway, sometimes form is not enough.
Interesting. I think that's just dogmatism. Well, no one deserves to be dogmatic about a particular thing in fitness anyway, because what we do is so multidisciplinary. I visited my osteopath. I'm now on a program. It started last week where I'm working on my strength, but to incorporate that, I've got to work on my core motor pattern, my lower ab strength, and my core strength in general. He was like, yeah, it's great that you're strong in these areas, but you've neglected so much of the integration part for so long. He said, we need to do a good 6 to 12 weeks of it. And he's right, because if I think about how I feel as an athlete, I feel strong, but I don't feel fully connected. So if I think about my left hip to my right shoulder in terms of that diagonal sling, when I go to put that into potentially a contact in rugby, I don't feel as strong as I should do, considering some of the linear strength that I have.
The guy I was thinking of was Dean Somerset. Yeah, I played rugby with a guy who wasn't. He was from New Zealand, so he grew up with it. He had these skills. He drank too much. He was a bit unfit, but boy, he knew how to lower his hips when someone tried to tackle him, and people would just bounce off him. He had an amazing ability to hit somebody and have them just bounce off because he was able to drive his force in the most efficient way possible. And everyone else watched him, saw him do it, but no one else could do it. So what did he have? Well, he had amazing functional skills and able to apply all his force in the most efficient way. So you probably lost a little bit of that. And so now it's taken a little bit to try it. Your osteopath got you in the right direction of trying to rewire your brain so that you can apply that force so that when you hit someone, you give them the biggest impact.
Well, it's definitely something I'm working on. I talk about it a lot, my weaknesses. I don't believe that I am any different to anyone else. I have flaws just like everyone, and I'm willing to work on them. And one of the things I've tried to work on in my off season this year is my weaknesses. And now it's contact time, which has started this week. It's something I'm going to work on, actually, how I feel in my positioning alongside my core and integrative kind of training. Because otherwise, I don't develop as a player, and I potentially come unstuck further down the line because that is my weakness.
If you're into that, you should read about Stanford University. They have a strength coach who's quite unique, and there's been two articles. I'll put them on the website so people can find them if they want. And I think the guy's name is Turnley or something like that. Anyway, he doesn't have the players doing as much bench pressing and as much squatting. He says, well, what good is it doing a slow bench press? What does that got to do with contact sport? So when his players, though, go and take the NFL Combine tests, they don't do as well as the other guys do. So anyway, he's written letters about it, and he had enough success. But the team wasn't doing very well. And then as soon as he got there, their injury rates went way down, and their success rate went way up. They're winning almost every game, like 2 years in a row. And when asked, what is the most important thing to test on an athlete, he said, ankle flexibility. Yeah. So it's a really cool article. I recommend you read it. And his whole philosophy is having people go back to sort of wrestling and doing body weight movements. And of course they still do a good bit with weights, but he also incorporates a more, quote unquote, I hate the word, but functional approach.
Well, I totally agree. But sometimes do you know what, when you think about your training, and we actually spoke about this last week on, I think it was podcast 153, about, I spoke to Dr. Jacob Wilson, the muscle professor, and we were sort of trying to package how people view their training, because it can be a struggle to actually think, well, what is the best path forward? I know I need strength. I know I potentially need more muscle mass. I need more core training. And it can be quite paralysing to really analyse all the variables and put yourself together a program. And I suppose I almost feel sorry for some people, because it would be great to go out and have a coach that programs for all this stuff every week. But there's a huge amount of people that don't have the opportunity or the finances to do that, but still want to do the best by their body. And I can see why people just stick to the same old programs, because they almost don't see how to package it any differently.
Yes. Access is key. Although now, as we said, the internet, there's so much more out there you can learn. SFMA is cool, the Selective Functional Movement Assessment, and there's a few different ones out there, but the kind of concept that you can be tested. So to know whether you need to work your core more. If you basically pass all those tests, then that tells you shouldn't be wasting your time. I'm not advocating going on the Swiss ball for most people, but there's occasional, situation and you find where that weak link is and strengthen it. But it saves time if you can just rule it out.
Mm. Nice. Well, Tom, it's been absolutely fantastic speaking to you.
Super duper.
In terms of any links, information, is there a place that you want to push people? We've mentioned the Active Release website to find a practitioner. What about people finding you? Or I don't know if you write articles or anything cool that people can find out.
I got an article coming out in Train Magazine about foam rolling and ART.
Cool.
I had an article in the Telegraph about ART, article in Athletics Weekly about Greg Rutherford. That's a real good story about ART. So all those, you can find me through any of that. If you go to activerelease.com, my website's on there under the provider search list, so you'll find me there and every other guy who does it and woman. And there's not just chiropractors. In fact, there's more sort of physios and sports therapists. It's a mix. So it's not a dogmatic thing or a one profession type of technique anymore.
Are you on Twitter or Facebook at all?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I'm all those things. Tom Feeney on Twitter. And on I've got Manual Therapy UK is my Facebook page I just started. And so you can find me there. And my website is whitleybaychiropractic.co.uk.
Awesome. Well, after I film the show, make sure you send that to me via email to make sure I can put it in the show notes. If you've enjoyed this show, please give me and Tom a shout out on Twitter. Tag us both into a post. Maybe expand some thoughts, bring up something that we discussed. Look, Tom and me are here to help you out. We want to help you progress things. For people that want to find Tom, he's a practitioner based up in Newcastle. Feel free to make the pilgrimage to see him. When I was at university in Hull, I used to travel to Leeds, which was an hour and a quarter every week when I was a student, and spend £50 per session with Janine Midgley of West Yorkshire Physio Co. Purely because I've always invested in my physical function. I've never been a perfect specimen. In fact, I'm far from it. So I genuinely believe that investing in your body is really, really, really important. And having practitioners that know techniques like ART, I think, is invaluable. So if you've enjoyed the show, please share it around, tag people in a post, tag us in Twitter, communicate to us. Otherwise, I will be back on the show next week with Rachel, all being well. If not, who knows? I'll be here next Thursday anyway. Again, Tom, thank you very much for being with me on the show. And I will see all of you next time. Ciao. Hey everyone, Ben Coomber Radio, episode number 154. I'll be honest, I just had to look at my notes for that because I get the feeling I'm always wrong with the numbering. So I made a commitment to myself that I would get it right this time. Not that it really matters. You're listening. You probably listen every week.